the equilibrium in goods market. We did that before, many times. Okay? And then we will be able to find what? We will be able to find whether we have trade deficit or surplus in, corresponding to this equilibrium upper level. Okay? So earlier we get this picture, right? So we just extend, right? Extend from this level of output, which is the equilibrium upper level, right? Extend downward. Oh, we find that, yeah, we have a trade deficit when output equals this level. That's it. Okay? So this is equilibrium output, right? Determined by the cross of these two and the trade balance. Okay, so we know that for this equilibrium upper level, we have trade deficit. So we will be able to find that using the two pictures there. Now let's assume that we have a change in the economy. Okay, say we have an increase in domestic demand. Here we assume that we have an increase in government spending, capital G. Okay. We all know that when G rises, ZZ line will shift up, right? Do we? Yes, good. Okay, so the equilibrium of the goods market will move from A to A prime, right? Okay. So let's assume that originally this country has trade balance, namely TB equals 0. Now, because of this expansionary fiscal policy, Y rises, but at the same time, it creates a trade deficit. Okay? So that is the cost, right, of this expansionary fiscal policy. We indeed stimulate the economy, but at the same time, we create a trade deficit. Okay? Okay, there are two important differences you should note between open and closed economies. There is now an effect on the trade balance. The increase in output leads to a trade deficit. Imports go up and exports do not change. So in this picture, we stimulate the economy, namely people have higher income. And when they have higher income, they purchase more foreign goods. So our import rises, and that creates the trade deficit. Okay? Second, government spending on output is smaller than it would be in a closed economy. This means that the multiplier is smaller in the open economy. This has something to do with the slope, right, of the ZZ line and DD line, right? And earlier, we know that ZZ line is flatter than DD line. So basically, you can just draw a picture, putting ZZ and DD in the same picture, and to analyze the effect of the expansionary fiscal policy. And you'll see that Y rises more in a closed economy than in an open economy. Okay? Here. Okay? Why? What is the intuition? Yes?
Some of the income they're making is leaking out to the foreign.
True. Okay? We are trying to stimulate the economy, right? But people now they have the opportunity to buy foreign goods, right? So the effect to stimulating our GDP becomes smaller. So it's leaking out. Yeah. Good. Okay, great. Let's see now, we have another change in the economy, namely an increase in foreign demand. In our analysis, that would be what? That is Y star rises, right? So foreigners have higher income. So if that's the case, what's going to happen? If Y star rises, in the picture, you have seen, right? You have seen. ZZ line, so if Y star rises, export will rise. Okay? So ZZ line will shift up. Okay? So in the picture, we see that, right? ZZ line shift up by delta X. Okay? Okay, and let's assume that originally at point A, that is our original equilibrium, okay? Let's assume that originally we have trade balance. So in the lower picture, the net export curve or line looks like this, okay? Now, when export rises, ZZ line shifts up. So we will move from our old equilibrium to our new equilibrium at point A prime. Okay? So Y will rise from Y to Y prime. Good? But we also need to analyze what's going to happen to our trade balance. Okay? So when export rises, ZZ line shifts up. And it will also affect NX or TB line. Okay? Because TB line is just X minus import. So when X rises, this line will shift up by the same magnitude. Okay? So originally, when we are at point A, Y is lower and with trade balance. But after Y star rises, our income, right, or our output rises. And at the same time, we have a trade surplus. Okay? Let's see. Good. So now we have two examples. Right? The first one is what? The first one is we increase our total spending, and we find that Y will rise. Good, right? But our TB is what? It's going down, right? We create a trade deficit. Okay? Second, other countries' income rises, right? What we see is our Y rises as well, right? And we have trade surplus. See? From these two examples, we find these two, right? Okay. Now, do you like this? Yes, right? Our GDP rises. Good, right? Which one do you like for these two? Trade surplus or trade deficit? This one, right? Okay, we like this more. Okay, so what does this imply to us? Okay, let me just move on. Let me just get this. Okay, we have derived two basic results so far. An increase in domestic demand, namely that first one, right? leads to an increase in domestic output. Why? But leads to also a deterioration of the trade balance, namely negative trade balance. An increase in foreign demand, Y star, rises, right, leads to an increase in Y and an improvement in our trade balance. Okay, so this page is that. Okay? Okay, so here, the first implication is what? The demand of the demand of any country will affect ourselves and others at the same time. Right? And when the openness is stronger, that effect is bigger. Right? Okay. So, which means that for policymakers, it's more complicated. Okay? When we are trying to design the policies to, when we design the macroeconomic policies, look at this. When we increase our government spending, our income rises, right? But for other countries, if they do nothing, then they will find that, oh, their output rises, and they will have a trade surplus. We are doing this thing, and we are hurting, right? But others do nothing. So here you'll find that Y star will rise, and foreign trade balance will be positive, right? If we do this, right? And if other countries do this kind of policy, then we will have benefit, right? So every country will prefer doing nothing and just wait for others to act, right? Because we can enjoy the benefit from other countries' movement. See that? Okay. So in the end, no one will act, right? Because everyone is waiting for others' actions. So how to break that kind of, how to say that?
Situation?
Right, yeah. How? So that's why we have many international organizations, right? Trying to make different countries to cooperate, right? They sign some agreements, right? We should do something, some actions together, right? Otherwise, no one will act. You see, right, from these two examples, right? Okay, but will that work? Okay, the so-called G7, the 7 major countries of the world, meet regularly to discuss their economic situation. The communique at the end of the meeting rarely fails to mention coordination. The fact is that there is very limited macro coordination among countries, right? It's because there is what? More hazard, okay? Some countries might have to do more than others and may not want to do so. And countries have a strong incentive to promise to coordinate and then not deliver on that promise. Okay? Yeah, I don't know how to. So we're human beings, right? So maybe we can apply the game theory right? To try to design some kind of mechanism to overcome this kind of more hazard. But that is another issue. All right? Okay. Fiscal policy revisited. Now let's move on to the second, the next section. Recall, the real exchange rate, namely this epsilon, is defined as E times P over P star. Now, I want to talk about the Marshall-Lerner condition. What is that? So, first, net export, NX, is defined as this, right? Export minus import. Let me see. So when we look at this net export, let me just write that here. Net export. Export minus import. Y, sorry, there should be the star there. Epsilon and epsilon. Okay, so if you look at this equation, you see that epsilon shows up in 3 places. Okay? And when epsilon, let me see, false. First, here, when epsilon falls, namely domestic goods become cheaper, right? Epsilon will rise, right? So export will rise. When epsilon falls, because our stuff are cheaper, right? So import becomes more expensive, right? So the denominator will what? Fall, right? And here we have epsilon, right? So epsilon falls. But when epsilon falls, the whole thing will rise, right? Because it's in the denominator. Okay? Okay, so when epsilon falls, this guy rises. This guy falls. This guy, the whole thing will rise. So these two are opposite. Is that true? Epsilon falls, the whole thing rises. This falls, yeah. So we don't know, right? For the whole thing, we don't know. Is that right? Rise, fall, yes. Okay. So, if the whole thing falls, NX will rise. But it's not necessary, right? Because it's possible that the whole thing is going up, right? And it's going up even higher than this increase. And in that case, the whole thing, NX, will decrease, right? So here, when epsilon falls, NX may rise, or unchanged, or decrease. We don't know. Because we have 3 forces, right? But in economics, we always say that when we have depreciation, net export will rise. Right? So we must make sure that this holds Okay? So Marshall-Lerner condition is the condition that ensures this channel always holds.
Again, please.
Marshall, okay, here, when we have depreciation, okay, from our analysis here, we know that nx might increase, decrease, or unchanged, or remains unchanged, right? But in international economics, in trade, international trade, we hope that when we have depreciation, namely when our goods become cheaper, net export will rise. Namely, we do not like the later two. But it's possible. Okay? So Marshall-Lerner condition is just a condition. Make sure that this always holds. That's it. You just need to know this. Okay? If you're interested, you can refer to the literature to find that paper. Written by Marshall and Lerner, of course. Okay? Okay. The Marshall-Lerner condition is the condition under which a real depreciation, namely epsilon falls, leads to an increase in nx. Now, let's summarize. The depreciation leads to a shift in demand, both foreign and domestic, toward domestic goods. This shift in demand leads to, in turn, to both an increase in domestic output and an improvement in the trade balance. I'm not sure if you can see the picture. So basically, the picture is there.
Somewhere.
So namely, when epsilon falls, okay, epsilon falls. I think we had that picture right earlier, right? When epsilon falls, nx, right, the trade balance line will shift up, right? And here the ZZ line will shift up as well. So this picture looks, I think, very similar to the picture we have seen earlier. Okay? Okay, now let's combine two policies, the exchange rate policy and fiscal policies, to see how we can use these mixed policies to achieve our goals. So here, the goal of our policies is what? To reduce the trade deficit without changing output, okay? So originally, let's see, we are at point A, okay, the cross of 45-degree line and the ZZ line, and Y is over here, okay? And originally, we have trade deficit, okay? Now, the policymakers want to eliminate this trade deficit, okay, without changing the upper level. Because maybe this is potential upper level, okay? We just don't want to change it, okay? Then how can we achieve this? By mixing fiscal policy and exchange rate policy. Okay, now here, the exchange rate policy is the central bank is doing something in the foreign exchange market. Okay, I'll talk about this later. Okay, so that epsilon falls. So the central bank is creating a real depreciation. That's that. Okay, that is the exchange rate policy. So if epsilon falls, then NX will rise, right? So ZZ line will shift up. So trade balance or NX line will shift up. Okay? And because we hope that Y won't be affected, Y remains at this level. So we can try to design some kind of exchange rate policy so that NX line will rise to this position, okay? And you can find from this picture that when y equals this level, trade balance is 0. Okay, if you do it smartly, but usually you cannot be this good, right? Okay, if theoretically speaking, okay. So if we can lower the real exchange rate, we can just do this, okay? And then we can what? We can shift the NX line upward like this. But with only the exchange rate policy, from this picture you'll see what? The equilibrium will move from A to A prime. So Y will rise, right? And if that's the case, if Y rises to Y prime, in this picture, we will still have the trade deficit, right? Which is against our original goal, okay? But with only exchange rate policy, we cannot do more, okay? Therefore, we need to add fiscal policy as well to what? To reduce, right? To shift down this ZZ line back to its original position. Namely, we need to have a contractionary fiscal policy, right? So ZZ line will shift back to its original position, and Y will go back to Y again. And at this situation, in this situation, trade balance will become 0, and Y will remain unchanged. Okay? Good? Everyone's good? Yeah?
If you do the contractionary fiscal policy, that'll change the interest rates, which then changes the exponential. It'll become either more or less.
How come? If you change your government spending, the interest rate will be affected.
Oh, sorry, fiscal policy.
Fiscal, not monetary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so if the government wants to eliminate the trade deficit without changing output, it must do two things. Namely, it must achieve a depreciation sufficient enough to eliminate the trade deficit. Namely, this line should shift up enough and exactly to this position. Okay, at the initial level of output. And the government must reduce the government spending. Okay? So here, this table shows you different policy mix for different situations. Okay? So our example falls to this category. Okay? So basically, you can see that if we have low output and trade deficit, then we should engage in an depreciation exchange rate policy. But for government spending, in our example, we need to decrease our government spending, but it's not necessary. Okay? Because depending on how you draw the picture, you probably will be able to find that this is not a must. Okay? If you draw the picture differently, maybe sometimes you do not need to change the government spending, or sometimes you need to increase the government spending. Okay, so this is just one example. So if you are interested, you can draw your versions of pictures. Okay. Section 5. The J curve. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Good. The J curve. Depreciation may lead to an initial deterioration of trade balance. But neither export nor import adjust very much initially. Eventually, export. Okay. Let me just explain this. Still, we need this equation. Depreciation, right? Depreciation. Okay, earlier, I said that if we have the Marshall-Lerner condition, Nx will rise, right? But here, when I say Nx will rise, it doesn't mean that this will immediately happen. Okay? And if you look at this equation, when epsilon falls, namely depreciation, because we have epsilon in 3 places. When epsilon falls, this guy falls, right? Immediately, right? Because it is not in any functions. Because these two are behavior functions, right? So epsilon affects x and import, export and import for some time. It takes time. It takes time for people to adjust their export and import behavior. Okay? But for this guy, because it shows up here in the denominator, so when epsilon falls, the effect of this is immediate. Okay? So when epsilon falls, this guy falls, the whole thing rises immediately. And the whole thing here will fall immediately in the beginning, right after epsilon falls. Okay? So right before the depreciation, we will see that export will fall in the beginning very quickly because people have not changed their behavior. Okay? So in the picture, we can see that this is the time. This is time. Okay? This is net export. So now if we assume that originally we have what trade deficit. So we assume that at this time point we have real depreciation. Namely, we have this. Okay? At this time point, when epsilon falls, the immediate phenomena we observe would be what? Would be the whole thing falls. The whole thing falls. It jumps down. Okay? And then it takes time for people to adjust their exporting and importing behavior. And eventually, these two guys will play their role in what? In bringing up the net export. Okay? So after time 0, we will see net export rises eventually. And eventually, ultimately, Nx will be higher than before. Okay? And that is this relation. So it takes long for this to happen. Okay? But in the beginning, it will fall. So the trend for the net export right after a depreciation looks like this. And this is called J curve. Where is J? Right? Where is J? No? My guess is that J is this, right? So I think that is the inverse J. I don't know. That's my guess. Take care. Let me go.